get rid of invasive species on the property. So as far as impact on Ames, I think what we're doing and intend to continue to do are exactly what you're hoping would happen in a natural area designation. And I think to Mr. Goodwin's point, I mean, to me, there's no negative impact on the city of Ames, very significant impact, obviously, on us as property owners of record. And it's just, the only thing it would amount to is a parcel boundary, instead of being here, is going to be here. I mean, it's just a line on the map. And I think as you're weighing and balancing this, I'd ask you just to consider that. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity, and Mayor, for allowing us to come back today and to address the council. So,
thank you. Anybody else want to address council? Okay, we'll close public forum. We'll go on to consent, then we'll go ahead and actually we'll move 2 items up, council, under disposition, Mr. Thompson's issue, and also the Cacklers. So moving on to consent, does council wish to pull any of the items from consent? Otherwise, entertain a motion to approve.
Consent.
Second.
All right, moved and second. Thank you. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, I'll make sure that you don't get this confused. I believe it's item number 2 on our disposition.
Correct. 2 and 4. 2.
That is, that's the Cacklers.
Yes.
And 4 is the Mr. Thompson's. So, and just as we're aware, under disposition of communications to council, it's really more or less, does it get moved to a future agenda? Does it get denied? Or are there other options included in the staff report? So we don't have opportunity to really do significant discussion or conversation. So I'll look to you to make a decision on whether or not you want to put it on a future agenda for discussion given the additional information, or if you want to take option 1 or option 2 as included in the memo from staff.
We're referring to disposition item number 2 at first.
Correct.
Thanks.
Which one is that?
That's Mr. Cackler's.
Mr. Cackler.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it's in reverse order. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and move that we put the Cackler item on a future agenda. There's been ample material presented today that this is complicated, and in order to fully make a good decision, impacts the long-term use of this property, I think we need to have this on agenda to really flesh this out.
Yeah, I'll second. I don't know that, either of the options in the staff report. I don't think we can decide on either of those at the time. I had sent all of you an email based on some information I had received from the county after a conversation that I had. And so I think we need to flesh things out a little more.
I think that it's fine for us to talk about it more. However, the issue that's actually been teed up for us, I think, is something that I don't want to deal with directly on a future agenda. That is, I understand the issue is whether to change a natural area designation or not. And I understand that there may be other approaches that would satisfy the Cacklers, but I think that's the issue that's been brought to us. So I don't think that we should put that on an agenda.
So how do we interpret the motion?
Well, somehow we have to be able to respond to the Cackler's proposal. And so what we do with it, I think, is up to some kind of disposition after our discussion of the item. So, Steve, do you have any further guidance for us as far as how we would?
I think you're just, I think you're asking to put on the agenda to discuss the issue, not necessarily the the one suggested outcome. So there's a,
So just for clarity, if you put this on an agenda, the only thing you're resolving at that point is whether someone can proceed with an application, and referring it back to Story County Board is, depending on what the outcome is, it's a gatekeeper function about whether a process can begin. You're not making any determinations on merits. It would just be which policies of the fringe plan apply or don't apply. And if you're willing to amend, if necessary, any parts of the fringe plan to address their request. And that
There
just
may be-
starts a process.
there may be another solution we haven't thought about yet.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say I would still prefer that the applicants work more closely with staff or someone to come up with a better proposal for us before we deal with it on an agenda. So that's all I'll say about it.
What if we can't, I mean, are you saying it shouldn't come back unless there's a better proposal before? Because I can't guarantee.
So I can clarify
Yeah, I'm not-
that the proposal is to be able to have 2 additional houses. As I understand it from the county, if they did nothing, there's a process where they could add 1 more.
Yes.
So they're asking for 3. Process allows for a total of 2. There really isn't an in between 3 and 2. So I think I guess that's kind of the question that's on the table, is if the council will do anything to get to 3, or otherwise it defaults back to Story County and you follow Story County processes and you can have a total of 2.
Yeah.
Again, there's been a lot of issues raised. I think one suggestion is that it doesn't even need an amendment, that they could do without amendment. I don't know if that's true or not. That's why we'll have to consult with the planning director and the city attorney on that particular issue. That wouldn't be an amendment that required changing the natural area at all. I don't know. That was being suggested. We'll have to study that further. But I can't guarantee we'll come up with a better, I don't know what better means in your mind or some people's mind. They would like to build 2 homes, more homes. That's the solution they're trying to arrive at, or getting us to agree to. I think you're asking, is there another way to reach that solution without amending the natural area boundaries? But I don't know if you're telling me if we can't do that, don't put it on the next agenda. I just don't know. I think there's been questions raised that we need to clarify for the council. Don't you think, before you make a decision on which way you go with it?
I agree. Having some of those issues clarified would be helpful. I think it's premature for council to just, if it were on the agenda tonight and we just started talking about it at this point, I think that would go in circles and not go anywhere. So I want to see more, kind of more information here before we put it on a council agenda.
So maybe the referral again is not to refer the request to change amend the text. It's really the desire by the property owner to build 2 new homes. Isn't that what it's? And what are the impediments, or are there any other solutions to getting there? I'm not saying there is, you understand?
Yeah, no, that's
Right.
You just sort of wasn't tied to the specific request to amend the
Right.
natural area. Now, we'll get into all those issues, I'm sure, in our staff report, right? Is that okay?
yes.
You have to clarify that again.
I think my motion was okay. We're just going to put this on the agenda. Staff will provide us with options.
It's not necessarily tied to changing or amending the plan, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Okay. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. And then item number 4, which would be the
Garages.
garages. There's a memo with that also.
I would move that we put that on a future agenda for discussion.
Second.
So, and I agree. We've dealt with this. I remember when Peter Erasmus was on council. Can we get something back from what we did before on this?
So this was an issue that Peter cared about kind of broadly, not garages specifically. And you had a council goal or a task at some point about reviewing single family zoning. It never got prioritized. So there isn't anything to go back to and bring back to you about single family zoning standards. So this one's narrowly construed to be about garages or non-conforming garages.
Well, and other buildings, right? I mean, accessory
Yeah, so the
structures.
accessory building / detached garages is what all is under this, the topic that's in this memo.
Okay.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Very good. All right, we're going to move on to item number 3, under administration, discussion of correction to information provided previously regarding number of signatures needed for a reverse referendum pertaining to the indoor aquatic center bonds.
If you recall, I think there were 2 correspondents, one by myself and a staff report on July 13th and 27th. There was discussion about the indoor aquatic center in which we related in that information that it would require petitions, signatures of 3,189 signatures in order to require a referendum on that particular bond issue. And subsequent to that meeting, and after consultation with our city's bond attorney, it was determined that this total is incorrect. It appears there was some miscommunication between our city staff team and the bond attorney when they tried to identify the number that was needed. I guess the key part here is what their interpretation is at the last regular city election. It should be the election that had city council members on it and the other provisions I talked about, the timing on it. So while they were referring to the 3,189, it was based on the November 20th election. That was not determined to be or interpreted to be the last city election. Rather, that should be at the prior election to that, which was November 5th of 2019. So based on those numbers, it appears the number of signatures that are required would be 477 signatures. Okay, I want to make that clear. I feel responsible for this. We put this on a council agenda, that information, and I feel responsible that we need to correct this on at a council agenda, so no one relies on that information to their detriment. Now, I think Mark also had a conversation with the county auditor, and they verified that's the number too, because I don't want to change it again. We're pretty sure that's the number now, right? So 477 is the required number of signatures for a petition. So I regret the error, but I'm glad we could clarify it. No actions needed, but we'll certainly make sure it's part of the minutes, and hopefully if people check the records, they'll be able to see this
Do
correction.
we know what kind of deadline there is for that? I've had several constituents asking about it, and I haven't been able to tell them anything other than the number of signatures. that
Kelly
are
or Mark?
required.
Kelly knows, I think, too.
So the petition has to be filed before the end of any public hearing regarding the issuance of the bonds. So it's not after your approval, it's before your approval, it has to be filed.
So our timing, remember, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, so if you remember all the steps, the urban renewal plan scheduled for August 24th. At that meeting, you can give additional direction to set a date of public hearing. It'll be in the first half of September, but we're recommending that happens before September 16th, which would naturally fall on September 14th as your first regular meeting. There might be some other options, but that's probably the last date you would look at it is September 14th.
So at that hearing, that's the time they have to submit it by.
So Kelly and Steve, I know that the media works really hard to try and present accurate information, and given this new information just for the date. So we're saying that we have a council meeting on the 14th of September, correct?
That's your regular meeting,
It's
yes.
a regular meeting.
And it's anticipated that would be the public hearing for the bonds. Is that correct?
You will make a decision on August 24th, what date that is. I'm just identifying that the 14th is your last regular meeting where you would need to make that decision before you couldn't meet.
I think it's alluded to, you could do it
it.
sooner than that. We got a
Right.
special meeting. We still have to give 10 days notice.
Yeah, so there's a
That-
10-day published notice requirement before any hearing can
It's through
happen.
that notice requirement, wherever that date is, got to have at least 10 days. So that could get us to September 7th. If you wanted to expedite this, they would have to submit it by this, either the 7th or the 14th, depending what our final discussion is on the timing.
Well, the reason I asked is that given the fact that the council and staff are very committed to transparency, and I know that we regret this has transpired.
Yep.
Just so people know that when a deadline is, so that there's no misunderstanding. Also saying, oh, well, gee, I hate to move that up all of a sudden for some reason. And they say, well, you just, you moved the goalpost, so to speak. So,
So the only date you should tell anybody is that on the 24th of August, you'll have an agenda item discuss setting a date of public hearing.
mhm,
So I would not promise anybody a particular date until that meeting happens.
that's helpful. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions on that now? Pretty clear, hopefully? Okay, good.
And if we receive further questions about the petition process, can we refer them to the city attorney? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, item 4, resolution approving partial repayment to Iowa Department of Transportation on the RISE grant.
Some of you recall that some years ago, then President Leith, Iowa State President, was able to secure a special appropriation, remember, around $50 million to build the hub building. Remember the hub building that's in the ISG Research Park? It was a major improvement because that facility allowed them to consolidate all the economic development offices that were spread throughout the university into one building. Now, they chose to locate that at a location south of the existing infrastructure on what's known as Collaboration Place. And that allowed us, then they approached us, about helping with the tradition that we've established of financing the infrastructure for the research park in different phases, if you recall. The phase at the time really was up the Workiva site on University Boulevard. As you know, Collaboration Place is farther south on that. So they approached us about doing that. And we had historically used TIF, tax income and financing, if you recall, to finance this operation. What we tried to do is maximize, as we always do, non-city revenue for this particular project. One place we would look to, and we've used in the past, is the RISE. Remember the RISE grant program that comes from, administered by the Department of Transportation. And there's two different programs you could apply for. You could apply for 50% grant funding for infrastructure if you didn't commit to any job creation. At that time, you could actually get 80% funding if you committed to a certain number of jobs. At that time, we were working closely with Iowa State Research Park Corporation, the President's Office of Iowa State, and also we were looking to Workiva, which was expanding substantially in the area. That building already existed and infrastructure was to that site. But at that time, they were planning on an additional 365 positions. So we approached the DOT, and this was kind of a usual request because normally, if you're going to get the 80% funding, those jobs would come from new buildings that occurred along the new infrastructure. You understand? This was actually on existing infrastructure, but they were very cooperative with us, and they let us count those 365 jobs. That allowed us to get 80% funding for the project. And you are able to count those jobs 3 years after the infrastructure is completed. And then there's a certain period of time within those. You can pick any period of time within the count those jobs. Well, Workiva has been very successful, but they've also expanded some of their jobs outside of the city of Ames as they move actually literally across the world in creating jobs in the United States. So they have fallen short of the 365 jobs. In fact, they've created 138 jobs towards that total. They're still very viable and important headquarters in our town. But because of the agreement we have for RISE, and you see this in all the RISE grants, if we fail to meet the job attainment goals that are stated in the application, then there's a payback required. Now, you don't pay back the whole grant. You would go from 80% down to 50%. Understand that difference? But we really had the cooperation with with the Department of Transportation on this because this is a phase that is not our latest phase. Actually, this is the phase that built the 3 roundabouts that went down to Collaboration Place and then over in front of the hub building. Actually, we have a phase that came after that, the ones where we finished up Collaboration Place and came back up north on South Riverside. Remember that project? That's the latest one. Well, there was a change that the DOT made in the project on the funding for RISE grants, especially for research parks. That in that latest phase, if you have a research park, you could get 70% funding without any jobs. Remember, it was normally 50% without any jobs. So that was an improvement. So what the DOT has done with this, we ask them to consider this, and the staff has accepted this, is that they'll actually apply this goal retroactively. So the payback would only go back to 70% from 80%, not to 50%. That's good for us. In addition, they've been cooperative because we said we did create 138 out of 365. We should get credit for that. And they're willing to do that too. So I've given a formula in here. If you look at that on the second page of the staff report, really we're down to about $278,000 that the city would owe to repay the RISE grant. Now could look negative, but I want to tell you, we built all that infrastructure then, even where we are now, with more than 70% outside funding. That's pretty substantial, right? Now, when I was asked to do this, you don't remember this, but when the research parks approached us about doing this, and knowing we shouldn't hold Workiva accountable for these jobs because they're held accountable for other phases, I said there's going to be a risk in paying back this, and if you want this, you're going to have to partner with us on any payback. So we have a separate agreement with Iowa State University Research Park that they will pay 50% of any penalty we pay. So of the $278,000 that's owed, the research park will pay half of it. So we owe about $139,000. And I say about, there's some final numbers that are going to have to be clarified here. Now, to help us a little bit further, the Department of Transportation has given us two options. We could pay the lump sum, the $278,000 up front, approximately. I'll say approximately in case that number is not exact. And then we will build the Iowa State Research Park and they'll reimburse us for their half. Or they've given us an opportunity to pay over 5 years in equal installments. Now, there is an interest rate, but this interest rate is established at prime rate minus 3%. To give you an example, that's pretty low. As of June 30th, it was 3.25%. If you subtract out the 3% in the formula, we would only pay interest at 0.25%, very low. In fact, we could probably, as we retain that money rather than paying a lump sum, we'll probably be able to earn interest more than, to more than offset that payment. Now, I caution you just because I don't know if they're going to charge us based on a July 30th number. I'm not sure the prime moved that much, but we still have to talk to them. Their final decision on this will be in an August meeting, and I don't know, Kelly, do you know exactly when that next DOT meeting is? So I'm talking about our conversation with the staff and what they're going to recommend, and we're assuming they'll go along with it. So that's a long-winded story, but I wanted to tell you I need to inform the DOT if we accept the payment of approximately $278,000, and then what approach we would like to have, either pay up front or over 5 years. And talking to ISU Research Park, now they are different from the university, so I don't want you to think they take all the money out of the vast budget the university has. They have their own cash flow needs, and they would prefer to pay it over 5 years. In talking to our finance director, I think he thinks it's advantageous for us to pay with this little amount of interest compared to what we can invest our own money in to pay it out over 5 years. So I guess we're recommending alternative one. With that in place, we have until I think the end of the week to notify the DOT of the city's position on this. Any questions you might have?
Steve, just as clarification, the Workiva has actually created more than 138 jobs. It was the timing, right? Because would you explain that just for the council?
Yeah, that only had to do with the timing for that 2014 up to this particular time frame. Good point. Even in Ames, they've created a lot of jobs, and of course, they've created them throughout the United States and the country too. So
they already had gotten started up. They already had quite a runway ahead of them.
Oh, yeah.
And then the point is, then they were expected to create 365 more jobs, but they already were ramping up. So the point is, I don't want people to get the impression that they have less than, only have 138 jobs out there. They have a whole lot more jobs. It's just more or less.
that's right.
It was the timing of that to coincide with the grant.
And they were helpful. We piggybacked on that. Again, normally that would not even qualify. We would have to have a company in hand that was going to locate along that new infrastructure.
A new company.
A new company, excuse me. That's right. So that was helpful to us to secure the 80% at the time. So we don't like to pay this back. But again, if you portray it as we were coming out less than we thought, I like you look at it, how much more we received. If you look at that, it's over 70% funding that was non-city money. That's pretty positive for a project that ended up was about $4 million, or I forgot the exact total, $5.5 million.
Plus, it opened up the opportunity for Ames Fitness and for McFarland Clinic.
And not only did it lead to the hub building, but it opened up all those other lots now that are available for sale and future economic development and jobs for the research park. So I still think it was a wise move on the council's part, and I'm glad we partnered with Iowa State University on the payback too. And you'll help them by doing the 5-year payback.
Steve, are we confident enough in the interest rate issue that if council moves alternative one, we aren't worried that that interest rate could be radically different.
Yeah, I knew you were
than-
going to ask me that. I just, if it changes, you know, 0.5%, it's still going to be worthwhile. I don't think the prime moved 1 or 2%.
I don't think it did either, but I don't know. I didn't look.
Do you want me to, well,
And we have to have a decision by Friday, right?
yep, would you have a special meeting? If I find out it's a different number, or what's the number you want me to have a special council meeting on to decide then?
I don't know. I think Dwayne would be the one to make the recommendation on that.
But we already have a recommendation from the director of finance, right?
But he's based on that 0.25. You're saying, what if it was 3?
Right. And
Well, it has to go
I,
up to,
I guess what I'm wondering is, can we move alternative 1 with the stipulation that if we discover that the interest rate is somehow radically higher than we're expecting, that
Yep.
we can have that special meeting and change our decision if we choose to. I don't know.
we could do that. We can certainly do it. Or if you think in the opinion of the finance director, that number changes so he feels uncomfortable with recommending it, then we would come back, right?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
yeah, that's,
Something to that effect?
you want me to make a motion on that?
I didn't want you to, but I think you're going to.
I was going to wait to see if anybody else had other questions.
Other comments?
So I would move alternative 1 with the stipulation that if the finance director feels that the interest rate is not in our favor, we come back for a special meeting
This week.
this week.
Second.
That's a good question.
Any discussion? All right. Roll call.
Richard?
Aye.
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Corey? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Item 5, review of the Ames 2040 plan. Kelly?
All right. Good evening, City Council. We're back for our second steering committee draft review night. And we spent a lot of time 2 weeks ago just refreshing ourselves on what the plan was about, the different elements. And tonight, I'm not going back through the materials. What I'm really hoping to do is go chapter by chapter and have the council discuss what we're saying are the principles and the actions. And the vision leads each chapter. The principles are really the little bit more defined. This is what's really important to us within this topic. And the actions are supporting those principles. So some of them are going to be specific and say this needs to be done to reach this principle. Others might be suggestive. Others might be leading you to future implementation requirements, either through city projects or changing ordinances or doing anything in between. So what we're really trying to get to tonight is there ambiguity about an action or a principle? Is there something that isn't mandatory enough? Is there something that feels too mandatory? And what we want to do is make sure we can be as clear as we can for the public about the intent of the council. Because after tonight, we want to take your edits. We want to finish the proofreading and typographical review and updating of the graphics, incorporate your policy changes. And then as you directed us, to bring the final draft back to you so that on the 24th of August, you can say, this works as the final draft for public review, and we can start an outreach process then in the fall. But we want to be as clear as we can to the public so they have a good idea where we're going. We don't really want to be misleading people or say, well, we're still considering different things. It's time to be forward on what we're doing. And we've had an extremely transparent process. If you think about what has happened over the past 2 years, everything that has been a draft has been on TV. You can view it on the website. You've had a chance to participate and review it. So this is not the first time the concepts are being reviewed. I think if you hadn't gone through the scenario analysis, you hadn't gone through the tiers discussion, you held a special public hearing just to take input on the tiers in January of 2019. So when you think about all the steps that went into this and how much comment you already received to get to this point, I'm hopeful that we're going to have engaged public, but not fielding new ideas and thoughts that have never been brought before you before. And you've dealt with some big topics, again, the tiers, the scenarios, the question about the climate action plan. You adopted the transportation plan last fall. So all of these things feed into this, and hopefully people are paying attention and understand how this works. But tonight, I'm really going to look to you to give us direction on those principles and actions. And as the last bullet says here, again, if there's other topics that are missing, something that's not in an action, that you don't see a principle and you want to bring that up again tonight, that should be discussed as well. I will highlight, and I did, that we sent out today clean maps for the land use map and for the fringe plan. We noted at the last meeting, some of those were really hard to read, and we get you better versions before tonight. Clean that up for you. And one of the directions at the last meeting was to incorporate a land acknowledgement. So at some point tonight, I'd like to get to the page 5 of the newer draft, and I'll bring that up on screen for us to see if that's how we were intending to address that comment. If there's something else, that's something I'd like to know tonight, so we can get that done before August 17th. So with that, I'm going to move forward. This was the basic structure of the plan. This is an introductory slide from before. We have a vision for the community that guided drafting of the plan. There's background, but really the plan elements are what you're going to use to administer this over time. And we're going to really look at the principles and the actions. Summary slide of the vision we'll have with each one of these with the chapter. So I'm not going to go through them again tonight right here. So just to jump right into it, if I'm going too fast, let me know. Land use and growth. We've had this vision statement for a long time. I haven't heard any changes to that. So we had moved into what's the land use chapter cover. These are just kind of a summary of that chapter. And then we get to the principles themselves. I don't have a slide with every action. What I will do is, if the council has actions they want to talk about after we kind of look at these principles and there's specific actions, I'll bring up the draft document and we can go to those pages and we can look at what they say if there's thoughts about them. So to start with, this is what we have within this chapter. We have 6 growth principles and 6 land use principles. The growth principles are really more about how the city grows, where the city grows, and the processes that go into that. The land use principles are really trying to talk more about place, development, and the mix of uses more specifically within different parts of the city. So they definitely work together, but they do have 2 different targets kind of on when they get applied. So with that, I guess comments on the principles, or we can open up the pages for the actions in this chapter.
I do have a question about the sustainable growth principle. And just by way of explanation, we don't have the slides that you're showing us right now. We only have the draft report. So that's kind of the way I've organized mine.
That's fine. This is the same stuff you had at the last meeting. Sure. I just thought to have something up on the screen, and then my intent is to bring up the draft report that you have for everything.
So for example, I'm looking at page 31, which has the text for growth 1, sustainable growth. Right, in the top left there. Yep. And I just didn't understand what it's saying. The second sentence reads, "This encompasses minimum population housing and densities that minimize the footprint of growth." What is minimum population housing? I don't know what we're aiming for in this one.
Yeah, I believe that one is one that's suffering probably a little from the rough draft nature of that. But I think what we were trying to say there is the vision is for new growth to be both economically it's number 1, right?
Yes.
Okay. This encompasses minimum population. What we're trying to say is, you'll see this in the actions, we do have minimum density requirements. So this is trying to say that as part of our sustainable growth, we believe in efficiency and being able to have a tax base that can economically support itself. So the intent is to support the idea of minimum population densities, minimum developments, expectations throughout the city. And then at the same time, it's talking about that to reduce cost of service, maximize existing infrastructure. So it's really talking about minimum development levels to be efficient and cost effective.
Okay, that's consistent with what's here. I wasn't sure what it meant. So thank you.
Yep.
And I don't know how I want to do this with the rest of council, but I've got like a list of things that I can talk about on other pages, but
Go ahead.
what's next, right?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So on the next page here, under G13, yes, exactly.
So G13 is down here in the bottom right.
Yes, correct.
There.
And it says, include higher density nodes for commercial and housing that are easily accessible from all parts of growth areas. And my concern about that is I think that's unattainable to actually have them be accessible from all parts of growth areas. Right? I mean, it's an ideal that we want to aim for something like that, but
What you're saying is if we have growth in the south, southwest, and north, for sake of discussion, way that's written, you would give the implication that you should have easy access from all those growth areas to one another. Is that correct?
it's both that's sort of the long distance, easy access, but
But is it incorrectly written, meaning for each growth area, there should have commercial
Yeah.
access?
So
Yeah.
I think the intent is what it says. It might not practically play out exactly that way. So in the scenarios, each of those 15,000 person areas had a feature like this in there. Each core, each
Right.
center was a little bit different, but the idea was that you were building around a concept of a complete, more than a complete neighborhood, because it's bigger than a neighborhood, but you had services that were centralized within each growth area. So I think that's the meaning there. Now, easily accessible isn't a measurable standard. I get that. But the idea is that you're mixing something into each one. It's not just a square mile of single family homes.
that there's something in each one that's going to be close enough to most things in the area.
Yes.
Okay.
And to have ultimately is supposed to lead to that idea that there's some identity there. There is a sense of place. There's services that you need. And it's not just a large swath of housing or something that doesn't really provide for regular usage of the residents or employees in those areas.
Not written very well.
So to tease that out, though, I mean, I think what was represented to council, and we talked about this, was maybe they have some growth in 3 areas or 4 areas. Is that written that it's expected that there would be higher density commercial in every
so
area?
I think the best translation, so this is probably, as I look through this a little bit more since our last meeting, I think the tough part to translate here is how much is directive to what you would put on this map versus future decisions that are not embodied on this map. So this is the proposed land use map. So if yes, you can see my cursor, right? Mm-hmm. So in the south growth area, we have a commercial center, right? That fulfills that policy. There is a center that is easily accessible for a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile all around the center of that node. Same in the west, you have this commercial center, and the way it's shown here is at County Line Road and Lincoln Way, and there's some higher density and some employment as you go along. The east, which there isn't a lot in the east because it was tier 1 was pretty minimal with what you had, but it was based on the idea that at least there would be commercial to start, then high density housing. And if you moved further on, that's when a commercial like village center would happen with tiers 3 and 4. And the same with the north. The north is the one that's going to look the most barren because the bulk of the commercial development was in a tier 3 situation. And that was because the patterns had already been set for the single family here. We do want some commercial, some village over here on the left side or the west side of the tracks. But the big picture issue was that there was a center. It just doesn't happen to be in tier 1 or tier 2. So if that's confusing or misleading, then I think it's really about if you see it on the map, does it fit that policy? If it doesn't, then that's where the map isn't working for what that policy is saying, or you're seeing it in later phases.
Kelly, I had a question about G18. We've still got this weird sentence fragment, Ames assets and regional position. I don't know what that means or why it's there.
just a second. It's going to be a little bit of toggling effort here. Okay, so my PDF reader is Explorer on this computer. Great. Okay, so which one is it, Gloria?
It's on page 34, G18. It's right at the top of the page in the middle column. Next, or go up, scroll up. You're past it.
Just G8. The
G18,
draft.
right?
G18.
Well, I
No,
was
just
looking at the new
G8.
draft and it says G1-8.
So I'm using the July 10th
Okay.
draft. That's what I have up on the screen.
All right, so it's
Because
G8
Sorry.
and it's got the same
Clarification.
issue as the draft, which
Okay.
is we have Ames assets and regional position. It's,
Yeah.
I don't know what that's there for.
Yeah, that is which.
Yeah.
It's G. I remember seeing that. Yeah, so it's
Right,
G8. Yeah. Yep, that's a fragment that doesn't belong. I'm very confident that just needs to be deleted. It was a note that I think I put into a draft earlier on that didn't even belong there. It was a
Okay,
note.
so you're marking these down to make sure that change wouldn't happen.
Yeah, we have that marked already.
It's still in the draft or the new draft.
So again, it's a newer draft, is not a perfected draft. We've got through a lot of stuff. We got
I
a
just
lot
want you
through a
to know it
lot,
was there.
and there are more to come in the next 2 weeks, no doubt about it.
Kelly, back to G13. I just think the key is that this council may not be seated 10 years from now. Maybe it will. I don't know. But the point being is that we don't have to be interpreting things, or staff doesn't be interpreting things. So I just think I would ask that you consider just doing some tweaking on G13 to just be clear in terms of what you described.
So like something
So-
that would say that it's accessible from all parts of its own growth area.
Yeah.
It could be one or two words. Exactly. It's not like rewriting the whole things. What was that again, Brahman?
I was just saying, if you referenced it to being, relative to its own growth area, then at least what you were talking about, where someone
Yes.
was,
That's good,
Thinking
Kelly.
it would
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
So
See that?
So it's more about being within the growth area that it's identified for.
Yes.
You're picking up thinking it's from all four.
right.
Yes,
Right,
that's how it
exactly.
reads. So can you just type that in
Yeah. So I
from its
think
own growth area?
Yeah, that's good, Brahman. Thank you.
Something like
it's
that.
being accessible within. Okay, I understand what you're asking for.
Or-
Well,
Every growth area should have commercial.
yeah. The
accessible.
point is
Mhm.
again. So I know this is going to be a learning curve for all of us, and I'm not saying I got it all down yet. So the principle is contiguous greenfield development, right? So that's where we got the tiers. And then within the tiers, that's where we're going to accommodate a lot of our population growth. So what should each tier have? It should also have not just single family, but commercial and high density to have a diverse mix of uses as well as support transit in the future. And that's where the accessible part, I think, is being in there. So I think we always got to think as we talk through this tonight, do we understand the hierarchy? And if it isn't supporting each other as it goes down the list, then that's not good policy and it's not good actions. It will be confusing over time. So all of us try to do that tonight and see if it really does stack up from the principle to the context of the decision down to the actions doing that. Okay, I have 13 marked. We'll adjust that.
And 18 also.
The
Per Gloria.
eight.
It's actually 8. And
eight.
Just 8.
8 is a
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah. So we're on the July 10th one. It's this fragment right here that we're talking about, Ames assets and regional position.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I do think that that's important because we did discuss the fact that we should be including something about our regional position and how that's an asset for us. But I don't think, maybe I'm wrong and I missed it, but I think maybe that's the reference to it that needs to be expanded.
All right. Next item, council.
I have something on G19 on page 33. And this text is talking about during an infill project, adding missing transportation and trail links necessary to complete the system continuity. And that makes total sense to me. The wording, I think, can be improved, but that's not really the issue here. What I found myself wondering looking at this is this saying that the projects themselves must do that as part of the project, or that somehow the you should consider the system connections when doing the project. So does the project have to complete the connections or just consider them? And does the developer have to do it, or is the city going to do it? Or is that just,
So
we'll
this
leave it up
this
to?
plan should not be should probably not get to that level of detail.
Okay.
Right. What it should be laying out is our expectations of what a complete project would be. So the point is, yes, that a missing piece of infrastructure should be addressed with an infill project. I guess
Okay.
I don't know how to interpret considered, because that means I thought about it and disregarded it. Therefore, I considered it.
Might have disregarded.
So I think it's meant to be stronger than that.
Uh-huh.
So usually in the subdivision code is where you would say you're supposed to complete this piece of infrastructure with your subdivision, and only in an extreme situation would the council agree to a waiver or a deferral that address that. So I think that's what it's trying to get to. And the reason that's probably more important is with the new Forward 45 plan and the Complete Streets plan, there's more infrastructure in existing areas than it would have been in the older plans that just looked out to the future and looked at the growth of the city. So we're trying to make sure we get stuff in the city when redevelopment happens, not just new infrastructure at the edge of the city.
I think that's a great explanation and interpretation here. It's just not, I was unclear when I read it. So that's the only takeaway.
Okay, so I already have that one circled. Good. That one will look different when you see it next.
Good, thanks.
Now that I'm looking at that page on G18, well, maybe it's different. Oh, yeah. The word scale is bolded there in a way that it's not bolded anywhere else in any of these G points. Is that, I mean...
It's meant to draw your eye to this box over here.
I see.
That's why there's only one of those, so you didn't see it anywhere else.
Maybe
like figure 1.1 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's not a pattern of
I tried
seeing
to
that
click
anywhere
on
else.
it and was going to see if it was like a
It
hyperlink.
seems random.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, thanks.
Next item.
I'll just mention on G33, I don't think we have to go over it, but the paragraph kind of falls apart as written, and so it was hard to understand. So I have nothing more to say about that. If I could say something else, is that okay, Kelly, or you want to look?
Yeah, when it like you said, when it just doesn't fit together as a paragraph or a sentence, noting that, we'll definitely do that, because it just dies with including, which doesn't make any sense at the end. But if there's also a question about what it was trying to say, then that's where I want really specific direction. We understand that one is not finished.
Well, the new draft that you just sent doesn't end that same way.
Yeah,
Right.
it's fixed.
It's fixed. Okay, good. No, I haven't been able to look at that yet.
While we're on that page, G30 says continued Ames tradition of inviting community participation at planning commission. What is meant by planning commission?
Planning and zoning, right? That's what.
It would mean the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So that probably should be clarified on what it
Change
is.
that. Yep.
Just G30.
Also in that same paragraph, it says using technology innovatively to accomplish something. I really don't care if we use it innovatively or not. I'd rather just use technology to get the job done. Doesn't have to be an innovative use.
Cross the word out, you're saying.
Yeah, that's my suggestion.
What is the etymology of innovative?
And there is just the word proceedings, at least in the initial draft, it says proceedings and then a period. Maybe you caught that already.
I didn't hear that one, John.
It says planning commission and city council meetings, period, proceedings, period, use technology to open access and.
Oh, yeah, I see it now. Okay.
That one's been fixed.
In the draft.
I didn't have time to go through and read the,
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
why
either. I'm
we're,
just kind of looking back and forth now.
yeah. So
thank you. Okay. Anything else on this page? Anything else, David, on this chapter?
that's
Yes.
Yeah, just trying to keep this thing going, that's all.
On page 47, this is a page that associates the complete street typology and land use directions. That's the title on the top left of the page. I think that was it. I think you just passed it. If you could keep scrolling.
Oh, so, okay, yeah. Got it.
Right, okay, yeah. So I guess when I looked at this page, I didn't understand whether to consider this as being purely informational or whether this is prescriptive, saying that these typologies go with these land use directions and you should always try to make them match in this way.
I would say it's supposed to be informational
Okay.
because it's content from another plan. I think one of the things that we need to do next is we have not taken the complete street plan and translated into ordinance about how it really works. So you don't have that layer in your subdivision code yet.
Okay.
So this is supposed to be informational. So if you haven't read the complete streets plan, you at least can understand the terminology and maybe understand intent. But it is not, I would not view this page as regulatory.
Okay.
I think it's supposed to be tying into page 44, which refers to typology illustrations from the complete streets plan and land use directions, use policy directions, maybe that's use policy directions are reviewed on page 54. So somehow between 44 and 54, we've got that typology illustration that then gets discussed.
So you have on the preceding page, you have, this is an excerpt from the complete street plan. So you're getting the boulevard, avenue, thoroughfare labels, right? So if you're reading the document and, well, what's a boulevard? Then the next page is supposed to give you that information without having to crack open another plan. And then as you read through that, then you should have a little bit of context to understand why the land use would reference one thing or another. So it's informational.
Kelly, can we go back to page 37?
37?
Is understanding intensity and density. Yeah, that one. I don't know. Maybe it got changed, but I think that the text under medium density and high density was actually reversed in the draft that we have.
Yeah, I think we had that one circled too. Did that get caught already?
And then should it say medium density residential? You have low density.
Yeah, it should say it means residential. Yeah, so we have that circled. Those are definitely not.
Okay. Then the other question I have is that it shows under low density residential, the average is 3.5 dwelling units per acre, and shows an example. And so the one on the left-hand development says 1 unit per acre. And then the other one is 3.7, which is basically like the downtown or just northwest of downtown. Is that what you mean by low density residential? That type of density, that the traditional, north south. I mean, I know that the arrangement of the streets can vary, but
One thing this is when we first started, we did talk about gross, which is where this information came from. In the policies, we went back to net, which is how we do it now. So I think the intent was yes, that low density. So on the basic question, it's trying to show you two different ideas of low density single family zoning. They're quite a bit different in how they look and function, but they are both low density residential when you use that measuring stick at 3.5 units on a gross acre.
Well, it says, text says for purposes of evaluation, gross density in this category averages 3.5 dwelling units per acre. So does it mean that we're going to have that developments are going to look like the right-hand image versus the left-hand image in terms of lot sizes for low density?
I would say we might have to revisit how this fits with the later land use categories. Because because you have a very specific policy about 3.75 for minimum density for new development, not an average. We have an average that's 6, as it was described in the policy for back earlier in the document. So I think we have to go back and revisit that this matches where we landed on the final quantitative numbers for that. So I think it's trying to just say there's 2 different versions of single family neighborhoods. It's not saying we prefer one over the other, but at the same time, it's also saying we're going to have a minimum density of some type that's definitely more than 1.
I'm just trying to envision a developer looking at this, or someone who's not that familiar with it, and just saying is, if the target is 3.5 dwelling units per acre, is that going to be, and I'm not arguing for one or the other, I'm just trying to make sure that we understand what's being communicated, because this is really setting a benchmark.
I think this is just communicating what neighborhoods look like when you measure density. I think that's all it's communicating. Because it's supposed to be explaining how layouts of single family home lots results in a particular density. These pictures are not meant to guide someone's decision. It's supposed to help you understand how built projects in the city can calculate out in reference to the density standards that are discussed on the left.
So some low density projects achieve the required density by doing a mix of multifamily and single family units, correct?
You have to meet density within each zone. So you typically cannot use apartments to blend your single family to a lower density. You can use single family attached with detached to change your density, but you can't usually blend apartments and then do really low housing as to compensate, or vice versa, do really low density housing and then use apartments to compensate for density.
Oh.
That usually is not allowed.
There's a development in southwest Ames where they had to put in townhomes or multifamily in order, I was told, because they had to hit a certain density.
Yep. So
Consequently, it was a mix, because the question was, why can't you just do all single family homes there versus building apartments or townhomes? That was all.
Well, that was the zoning district though. So once you were in an FSRM zoning district,
see.
you had to meet minimum of 10 units per
I
acre.
see.
If you were in the single family to the south of there, you couldn't have used those apartments to then reduce your single family lower. That's how it works now.
Okay.
So I think we have to clear up medium and high density. I think we'll look at this page a little bit more. I think it needs to be clear that it says understanding and intensity and density. It's meant to be informational, descriptive. It's not meant to be regulatory. So I think if we have to adjust that to make that clearer, that these are examples, then that's probably appropriate here.
So help me understand, is this plan going to be setting standards, benchmarks, or targets, or just being general? So for example, if someone came in and said, okay, there's low density residential shown on the map, and they came in, I'm just throwing this out, and they came in with something which was one, like on the left image, 1 unit per acre. Is that going to comply with what the intent is of what is being developed and going to be used for the next decade?
So this is not the regulatory page of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3.75 would be, but it's measured on net, which is why it's so much different than that gross. Because once you account for the roads in that and the open space, you're going to get to our net number. It just shows how much different you can lay. What doesn't show up in that one that's 1 acre is what's the common open space in that project. So it looks way wide. It looks much more wide open because there is non-privately owned land in there that gets subtracted from the calculation versus the downtown version, which it's all private property or streets. And it increases your density that way. So this won't regulate it, but the minimum density standards would be applicable just like they are now to new development. But your zoning district should already have that embodied in them. And it's not a question of whether it's compliant with the comp plan or not, because the zoning district should be compliant with the comp plan.
and I'm sorry, this has probably already been answered somebody else, but so in this plan, will there be those densities identified, or that's someplace else?
It's one of very few things that I would say are mandatory. So yes, the 3.75 is in here, and I believe it has the average of 6 dwelling units as a broad average for a growth area, articulated in here too. I think they're in the growth principles.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly, along those lines, is it fair to say that things that are defined in other plans or in our zoning code are not necessarily spelled out in the comprehensive plan because we assume the comp plan works with those other documents?
Say it one more time.
So, okay, I'm going to try and say it again. Along the lines of John's question, is it typically assumed, although with some exceptions like the 3.75 that you mentioned being spelled out, that the comprehensive plan works with other documents like the zoning code and other plans that already exist, and therefore the comp plan doesn't necessarily spell things out that are in those other documents?
So I'll take the zoning ordinance away from plans. So I would say, yes, it's consistent with Forward 45. The Parks Master Plan's a little bit out of date, but it's, I mean, as much as it can be because that plan's out of date, it is in terms of following the hierarchy of parks. We have the neighborhood and the community parks and those things. So those concepts are there. The zoning ordinance, not all parts of the current zoning ordinance are going to be consistent with this plan. Like, so when we create a new designation like general commercial, we don't have a zoning district that perfectly implements that. As you've known, and we get to the land use categories, we gave you a list of the most likely districts, but they're not perfect. So some tweaks will have to happen to those to probably match exactly what's described here. But in many cases, what's in a zoning ordinance is such a level of detail, it doesn't directly get into a comp plan in the first place. So usually you're talking about purpose, intent, uses, maybe intensity of use, which is density or floor area. And that's kind of the max that you usually describe things in a comp plan, and let the zoning then deal with setbacks, landscape standards, design guidelines, parking ratios, all of those things. Generally, that's how it works.
So I'll follow up with something that I've been asked multiple times in the last week or so, and that is, since we have on page 48 the descriptions of the infill or overlay categories.
You said 48?
48. And throughout the land use chapter, we seem to discuss almost all of these. Why do we not have a discussion of the medical overlay, which is arguably the most contentious overlay that we have in the city, because it had to be hammered out over very long discussions with a ring of neighborhoods. And so the neighborhoods are very concerned that there's nothing about the medical overlay district. There's no separate page for it.
I fielded that. I think I got that email as well. So nothing in here is changing the zoning that's out there. And Eloise talked about this email. Wasn't there another reference in here?
It's on the map and it's just a small paragraph. That's all it says right there.
Right. So then.
But every other paragraph in here that describes an infill area or an overlay is described and discussed in detail, and the medical district is not, and it's creating a lot of anxiety.
Okay. We can clear that up. There's no intent to change anything about the current medical hospital zoning district with this plan. So that's easy to clarify and clean up. So, yep.
There is the secret plan that we can't talk about.
I wouldn't even joke about that, Tim. This has been highly contentious over the years. And I think in the LUPP right now, it's spelled out very specifically that intensification occurs within those boundaries, and we recommend other forms of growth in those other medical areas. And so the question is, why isn't that discussed in greater detail? And Steve, I think you went through this, so.
I have an advisory group, works with the medical industry and the surrounding 3 or 4 neighborhoods, and they're concerned about this, so.
I
agree with you.
think at
But they-
very least, having a page about that overlay will tell people that we haven't ignored it, because every other overlay is covered.
It's not there. They don't know how to have a whole page though.
Well, but they've got a section that's more than a tiny little paragraph. And so that is what is creating the anxiety. And I can understand why. So it seems like we just forgot about it. And it's extremely important to those neighborhoods that this be included.
So I guess at this point, that's one where I would like a motion or something, because that's just probably the most clear or specific thing you guys have brought up so far. So let's, instead of us just say we'll do it, let's get a motion so it's clear for all of us what we're looking for here.
Can you give us a page number to look at too? Clay? You
Yeah,
got it
it's
right.
It's page
Well-
48.
so we're on page 48 of the plan, and it's right now it's labeled as medical overlay. I believe that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would move that we have a page added that discusses the medical overlay, just as we discuss the urban corridor overlay, the redirection overlay, and all of those other things that are bold on this page.
So that part's easy, but I want a little more clear direction that you would like it to follow the current zoning purpose, which is to essentially limit the expansion of medical in this area. And there's some other things in there about how that works. That's what you're really getting at, is you want the current version of zoning
So
to
I would
connect
move,
to the description of the overlay in the plan.
Your motion died for lack of a second. Go ahead, Gloria.
so I would move that we maintain the wording of the current overlay discussion in the LUPP for the hospital medical zone. Is that what you need?
I would not want to commit to that without reading it. The person that emailed me didn't quite capture what was really in the land use plan versus what's in the zoning. I think everybody's pretty comfortable with what's in the zoning, which has pretty much everything locked down to how it is. This is why you're going to see it again. So I guess you can say that. I think without knowing exactly how to quote it from the current land use policy plan, I'm not sure exactly how it fits, but I understand if you're trying to explain. So I believe the belief is we're not trying to pile additional intensive medical office to this corner of 13th and Duff. The existing uses there can continue and may need to expand or keep themselves viable, but we're not trying to add more medical campus and keep stretching this area out. That's kind of the intent of what the land use policy plan says, and that's definitely how the zoning works. If that's the intent, that we can definitely put back into here.
I'll second them.
Well, but see how you say, like, on the redirection in the second paragraph, changing these areas to urban uses that address housing and development goals of the city would be considered, even though that's a positive thing. I think what Gloria's asking on a whole new page, but clarification is you don't support, there will be no changes. I don't know what the correct wording is in the hospital area in terms of density or expanding the boundaries.
Well, I actually was thinking that the parallel language is perhaps in the near campus overlay at the end where it says changes to existing conditions are expected to be limited in this overlay area with a priority placed on neighborhood conservation.
So just duplicate that sentence again.
No. So where truly the medical offices, you're not conserving a neighborhood. You're conserving the neighborhoods around
it. That's
the
true.
actual
You're right.
commercial area,
Mhm.
which is totally different than the overlay because you're trying to conserve within the overlay. So it need to be
correct.
tweaked to be about compatibility with adjacent neighborhoods is how that would have to get tweaked.
Well, if you can pull something reasonable from zoning, that's
Well,
fine.
I think my sense is that Gloria is referring to, for example, page 64. There's a redirection overlay, an entire page. Urban corridor overlay is on the next page. near campus overlay is a complete page. And I think my understanding was you were asking for, why is there not a medical overlay page similar to the other pages, because it's not just a matter of paragraph, but there's very specific goals, development guidelines, public actions, characteristics that are included in that. And so it just seems like it's kind of an afterthought versus being more intentional. So I think that
That
was
was my initial motion, but then Kelly wanted something different. So, I mean, what I want is for us to lay out the hospital medical overlay in the same way that we lay out every other overlay in this plan. And I don't know whether that requires us to make additional decisions. Maybe it does.
So what I needed to know, though, to fill out that page, I need to know what direction I'm going, and that's where I was trying to get to. Are we supposed to be taking the concept of essentially how the zoning is written, the purpose of the zoning, and write these kinds of statements out to flesh out what the overlay is trying to do? So there obviously we'll have to think about that a little bit when in terms of, I mean, character is easy to describe. I don't know that there's any. I mean, this is where I don't know what goals the council has for that area.
Well, I guess I would just say that I don't think that council was asked to participate in goals, development guidelines, or public actions on these overlays either. So I mean, I'm curious why you would need that kind of direction for the medical overlay at this point in time.
Because I just need clarity at the very end of the process so I can effectively get it done, basically. So that's all I'm asking. I'm not arguing about what it should or shouldn't be. I just need to have some direction on what you would like to see in the next draft.
Let me withdraw this last motion that I made. Is that okay with you, Bronwyn?
Oh, yeah.
And I will go back to my first motion. I would move that we add a page for the hospital medical overlay that is similar in nature to the pages for the other overlay zones.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
So just to flesh this out for people that are watching, John, I like the way you've tried to kick the tires on this, in terms of thinking about what ifs. So if Mary Greeley said, or McFarland said, we need to have a conversation because the population has grown. And in order to accommodate the larger population, we need to be able to expand facilities. How would this plan serve as a guide for that decision?
So if it's not in that, I mean, if they want to expand to in a residential area, plan's not going to allow it. That's going to take a comprehensive plan amendment. You're going to, just like any other land use designation, you're going to have to evaluate whether it warrants doing that. Obviously, the neighborhoods are very engaged around here, and they'd be sensitive to that. And you would have to deal with that just like any land use policy plan amendment that you would see today.
So it doesn't preclude a future council from saying that the circumstances have changed and the community needs the opportunity to have expanded services.
The way the last plan worked was because the premise was that we weren't making a hospital medical district that was going to take over a couple additional blocks of residential neighborhoods. Those services needed to show up in other commercial zones of the city. So that's one reason why you have the Eastgate subdivision out on 13th and Dayton, and you see medical uses there. That zone was created, and that intent was to fulfill the LUPP, to move medical uses there, not just keep piling them into that intersection. Mm-hmm. Now you've seen McFarland go west, you've seen McFarland go south. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's how that vision ended up being embodied in real development over the last 20 years. Yep. And so when the hospital wanted to expand and do an addition, we didn't do a comprehensive plan amendment because it was occurring in the footprint of the medical area itself. Now there was outreach and discussion about how that worked, but it didn't need a comp plan amendment.
I think in the current municipal code, it specifically calls out developing a more intense hospital medical zone if they want to expand uses, rather than moving outward past the boundaries. It's intensification within the current boundaries that exist.
I'm just making the point that look, Ames is going to change. And we have to recognize that, and that there may be a need for a future council.
I don't see a problem with that. I mean,
Yeah.
this whole plan is a 40-year plan. I assume there'll be lots of requests for changes over the years, just as there are now with the land use policy plan.
Okay, everyone understand the motion?
No, not anymore. I've just forgotten what it was. Let me look. I've got it.
Um,
Okay, a page that's similar to the other pages.
Yeah, and just for clarification, in the current LUPP or the draft Ames 2040, it says medical overlay. I think your motion said hospital medical. Is that correct?
It's technically the SHM zone.
So in the zoning code, it's called Special Purpose District Hospital Medical. That's the name in the zoning ordinance.
Just want to be consistent in terms of it says medical overlay here on this page, and just so for consistency, do you want to keep it medical overlay or do you want to have hospital medical?
I think consistently right now, it's always medical.
Which says major hospital and medical campuses and surrounding ancillary uses. That seems to be all encompassing, but I just want to make sure that the motion reflects. And otherwise you should change medical overlay to hospital medical overlay. Do you have a preference, Kelly?
I don't have a preference. I would probably put hospital because we only have one of those. We have other medical areas, but I don't think it's significant either way.
Okay.
Can I ask one follow-up
Sure.
question to Kelly before we vote? You said earlier that even if we did not do anything additional with our comp plan right now, and the comp plan is adopted, and for example, McFarland wanted to buy some new houses in the immediate neighborhood up there, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. First, because of zoning, right? And then second, because even this comp plan has a map associated with it that draws a boundary that says this is residential outside of that. That would also be an impediment, right?
Yeah, so this is the map. Because it's commercial, it's labeled as core, but you can't see the hatching, and that's what keys to the medical overlay
I see.
component of it to distinguish it from the other kind of concentrated commercial areas. But you're right. So the neighborhoods are shown in this brown or orange color around it. If they acquired property, they can't use it for commercial purposes if it's in a residential zoning district.
Okay, that helps.
Okay, those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. All right. Anything else? Under this first chapter.
Oh, I don't know whether we're still in the chapter. I have something on page 50. I think so.
I believe that's the same chapter still. Yes. Go ahead, David.
Okay. At one level, this is kind of a wording issue, but it's one that's repeated throughout, and I think it's worth just talking about briefly. Maybe we just move on. If under development policies there, the first paragraph sort of introduces some concepts, including public actions. The second sentence says, public actions are intended to identify potential initiatives for the city that relate to broad city goals. So I think of things that are either actions or public actions in the rest of the document as being the sort of things that might be on a to-do list or a keep in mind list going forward. But when I read the rest of the document, many of them really seem like they're just policy statements. They're saying, keep doing this, don't change course. And so they don't seem like initiatives to me, the way this is phrased. And so one option is we could just not care about it and say, okay, we're going to call them actions anyway. Another thing that occurred to me is that we could call them something like just recommendations generally, rather than a policy statement.
So you're talking about this column and all of the land use categories, or you?
Yeah. When it repeats throughout, it's usually just called actions, right? But so, for example, the first one here on the top right here says use greenways as corridors for pedestrian and bicycle transportation and recreation. Well, we do that. We want to keep doing that. Not really an initiative. It's just something that we do in value and recommend. So maybe this wording isn't that important. I just wanted to mention it to council and see if there was, any strong feelings about this. If I were writing this, I would have said something else, but. there are many other examples. The one below, use greenway and open spaces as conservation development techniques. And I'm not going to visit all the other pages, but
I think recommendations make sense because it doesn't commit us to doing it either. These are like our recommended actions.
neither does actions. I get that. I guess I'd be comfortable just having mentioned this here if no one has anything else to add. Kelly, if you want to think about it, and if you want to stick with actions, if you think that communicates that best to the public, then okay, I just wanted to bring it up. Unless council has anything to say about this.
I mean, I have to think through the idea of using the word recommended. Are you recommending to yourself what to do? I understand that maybe not all the actions are committal level, but say I have to think through what that would mean because you're recommending to yourself if you call them recommendations.
Yeah.
Is that really the heading we would want? I don't know that it always would capture the flavor of what's in that list. Sometimes it probably does.
But I think that is kind of the role of this document, is that it is a source of recommendations for future councils and for planning and zoning commission primarily. That's really who the audience is. It has to be accessible to everyone, well, many people, but I think that's the primary audience. And so, of course, we can change recommendations over time as well, but
yeah, I would agree that the tone of this plan is very much advisory and not a ton on implementation or mandatory elements. So it is definitely trying to advise you about what you might want to take an interest in the future.
I think pretty consistently in these columns, action verbs are being used. And so I saw that as appropriate. There are a few instances where the parallelism doesn't apply. In the residential one on page 53, we've got preference for infrastructure improvements. Well,
so, and I have a lot of them marked too.
Yeah,
I don't,
so-
the point isn't to go through them.
no, but the nature of these items is that they are action verb statements and that they are things that we are already doing or that we plan to do or that we should continue doing, as you say. And so I think that actions is appropriate because of the nature of the things that appear in the list. I don't.
Initiatives then? I mean, maybe we should change the language that says that they're initiatives. Just trying to get consistency here. But I'm feeling bad about taking so much time on this already, right? I think I've plopped this in a lap, right? And I'll be okay with however it turns out.
Well, I think you pointed out on page 50, David, appropriately in the first column, it says, second sentence, public actions are intended to identify potential initiatives for the city that relate to broad city goals and the vision of the plan. So
It suggests they don't exist yet, right?
yeah. That's the definition. That's my takeaway from the definition of public actions. Maybe it'd be helpful to have that somehow defined someplace else. So when you're going through it, it's not, you're not trying to find that definition.
I'm thinking that through a little bit. I'm sure that as Marty first wrote this verse before I edited it, it was probably different because I probably put in things that we're already doing, not just things we weren't doing, because I didn't want to lose track of the quality things we are doing. So maybe that's why it's starting to. They're definitely clearly not all new things,
right?
And I definitely we don't want to lose track of the good things we are doing because
I think that's appropriate here. I'm not proposing we lose them.
Now that you're talking, I mean, I know I changed some of them to continue because we were doing it.
Well, is it possible to simply say identify existing and potential initiatives so that it encompasses what we've already done as well as what we could be doing?
Or the other option is you have under public actions, you have two, where you have both what you're doing and what you want to do, is you add another heading in that same column and just says, continue doing, and then public actions. And then you separate the two, you just sort them. This isn't a policy decision.
It isn't.
Or,
I understand the comments and I'm trying to, it's a lot to kind of process. How does that fit on 30 of these? And
exactly right. So can
you just make note of that? And
yeah,
move on?
yeah, we have that. We'll think about that on,
Okay. Thank you, David. Anything else?
Okay.
Page 52, on the bottom right. It's the page labeled 51, I guess. I'm sorry about that. Agribusiness facilities. Should this say limit agribusiness facilities that do not meet urban design and infrastructure needs? It seems to be promoting those that don't meet the needs.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So it'd
Yes.
probably be
Yes.
limiting agribusiness.
Yes.
Thank you. Page 53, or actually 52, it's 52. In the middle column, okay, development guidelines, second from the bottom, it says integrate pedestrian connectivity, including path systems, into development designs. I think it's a kind of a neat idea, but we're talking, this is the rural character page. And I find it a little surprising that we would say that that an aspect of rural character is to include path systems into the development designs. I think it's neat, but is that really what we're saying? Don't recall having discussed that.
You probably haven't. So rural character is really outside of the city.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of it as being like, farmhouses are things that are trying to be like farmhouses.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a critical thing to have. It would cause subdivision code or some other changes to have to be done to be able to make that apply. And then you generally are asked to waive those standards anyways. So
Instead of integrate, could we just say encourage, like the one above?
That's a good idea.
I think maybe it shouldn't be thought of as within the project, but if it's along where a bike trail or something that's more of a regional
Oh, I see. Into.
facility, I think that would be the more appropriate way to think of that.
That makes sense to me. I didn't.
And that helps guide the fringe plan in the county. We would probably not really have decision authority over it, but I think that if I was going to keep it in, I would focus it more on including links for regional transportation improvements.
So this would be like the irons.
Yes, that'd be like, yeah, we have a shared use path plan that shows we want this to go along GW Carver. That should be included. Or the Tedesco corridor extension south of Ames, that if the county was to do something out there.
So the word pedestrian is really maybe the challenging part here, because you're talking more about bicycle infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm just playing off of what I'm hearing. I would say that's not a critical policy to have because you're not probably ever going to annex these areas. And most people aren't going to want to build sidewalks to connect 1 acre houses or 5 acre houses. And that would really be the county's issue, probably more than ours. So do you want to delete it or change it to a reference to transportation links or something like that?
I guess if you could rephrase it to indicate that it's about participating in longer range types of connections.
Okay.
Then I think that would help clarify and
Is
would be
it-
useful.
It's supposed to be rural, but like, the county sort of subdivisions that you see. What's that one that's right across from Prairie Moon there? Whatever that's called. They don't have sidewalks, really, right? So people are walking on
Squaw Valley.
Yes. That's what it is. But that is kind of a dangerous place for pedestrians to try to walk because they really only have the road. And so that's why they have those speed bumps and everything like that. So is this trying to?
I think I shouldn't say, is it trying? Right now, the council should decide what is it trying to do. Is it trying to require sidewalks in rural subdivisions? Or is it trying to you guys need to tell me where you want that to go.
Right now it is.
I would say right now it's suggesting some element
Yes,
of
and
pedestrian system
I
in
think-
rural subdivisions.
I think that's okay. I think otherwise people get used to not walking and it flows over into the,
What if it's just left in and when it goes out for public comment and see what people, if you get some pushback or, I mean,
Yeah.
but it's a great goal to work towards. Okay, next.
I'm on page 55 now, in the top right. Under public actions in the sort of middle top right, it says review and modify zoning and subdivision regulations to address intended range of uses and design standards. And when I read that, I just wonder, is there something specific in mind that needs to be addressed here? Because it's kind of a boilerplate thing. We should be doing that generally. But is there something that's specific to this, it's RN3 expansion areas that needs to be addressed?
So the second bullet isn't permitted. I think you would have to go through, like I said, the complete streets plan, avenues, boulevards, mixed use. That's not in code right now. So that would be one of those things that needs to get put into the subdivision code to effectively administer the RN3 neighborhoods, because they're where the new infrastructure is mostly going to go. So I think it is broad, but there are things in here that are not currently in zoning or subdivision codes.
I guess I'd just suggest it would be helpful to the reader if there are specific examples in mind to throw in a couple, and that would help.
David, this is a good place. Your comment about the mandatory versus maybe suggestive on the public actions, the item of support transit extension to serviceable areas. Boy, today we have a very difficult time extending Cyride much beyond its current footprint, unless we made significant changes to Cyride itself. So that's just not going to happen just because we build it. It's not. I don't want to communicate that we're going to be extending Cyride.
I think there are other places where we mention that same thing. And I can't remember where it was earlier in this chapter, perhaps under the different categories, the LU categories or the G categories, I don't know, somewhere.
When they talk about supporting extension of the future transit service to emerging neighborhood cores, like we talked about.
So I think we've had this conversation, and we tried to strike the balance that we didn't want to neglect that we want to plan for transit, which really revolved around density and using particular streets that would be effectively able to be served by the buses, or at least transportation time, it would be competitive, hopefully. We were also trying not to say that financially that's going to happen in all areas. So I think throughout the document, we're trying to say plan for it, but we don't know the funding will be there to do it. And again, I think the land use map translated that idea with the cores, with the higher density housing being shown in certain areas. So to me, support doesn't mean you budget for it necessarily. It means that we want to support it, may not be able to fund it, but we want to support that if possible. And serviceable areas is definitely the key here, right? We're not sending it into low density single family areas. And what is serviceable? Well, if you can't fund it, right, it's not serviceable. If it's a 1 hour headway to get a bus, is that somewhat serviceable? Maybe. So I don't think that's committed to anything. I think it's keeping it there for not forgetting that the expansion of the city should contemplate transit when possible.
And that's what's sort of my point, that it doesn't commit us to that just because it's under public actions.
Yeah, it's not meant to. Financially, it's not meant to.
Ready to move on?
Yep. Page 64.
I like that. That's 8 pages in one comment.
And 64 is a power of 2. How about that?
This is the worst chapter, right? It's the longest. It's the most detailed. 64, correct?
Yes. So the bottom, middle column, development guidelines, and the bottom bullet. This page is about the redirection overlay. And so this bottom bullet says, redirection areas with civic or public land designation will require a public comprehensive plan amendment one of the strongest statements we have in this document, prior to rezoning for any use other than RN3 with single-family zoning. So this sounds like really specific and with exceptions in it, and I just don't understand why, where it's coming from. Or
So
Breckenridge.
partially. So it's kind of, this actually came up in one of your workshops. I think you received a comment from the public that asked you to look at university land and brought up that you used to have a government overlay a long time ago. And this is trying to take that idea that you shouldn't assume you're going to get high density. You should not assume you're going to get commercial. The assumption is you're getting single family.
The
So
default.
Breckenridge would be another example.
The default is going to
The
be
default is single family zoning.
low density.
And when we look at the map for where the university areas are, that all makes some sense. There might be other justifications, add a commercial node or something, but that's why you need to amend the plan to justify it.
So I understand that. And in fact, I think I brought up that comment to council at one meeting. But why the exception for RN3 specifically with single family zoning? Couldn't there be other types of?
So as it's structured right now, your choices, if we didn't change anything else in the zoning ordinance, your choices would be a PRD or FSRL. You could use a PUD with the FSRL, but your only choice is really FSRL in these expansion areas as our current zoning districts are written.
Well, in the plan though, RN2 is established. RN1 is traditional neighborhood. So I think the
So
idea
they
of
just wouldn't be
RN3
appropriate.
is that when it's expanding.
So in the nomenclature of the neighborhoods, RN3 is all essentially neighborhoods from 2000 and on.
New.
Everything new.
Everything new
Yeah.
since 97 through the end of this plan, basically. So that's why it's RN3 as the reference rather than RN1 or RN2.
Great. Okay. So this bullet basically says if the university sells land, then it has to be zoned residential unless we go and do something else.
Yep.
So for example, if we were able to obtain the state greenhouse the nursery property on South Duff, I would love to get a hold of that property and develop that. The default would be,
So you pick the exception on the land use map. We have already designated that as commercial with some single family. So we committed ourselves when the South growth area discussion, we as the city said, we agree that we think commercial belongs here and single family belongs here. If it's not those two things, then they're going to need a comp plan amendment. I think the more pertinent examples are the stuff around Mortensen and State. If any of that land became available, the default is single family.
thanks for clarifying on the nursery.
Yeah, so the nursery, I think everybody was committed to those uses as the starting point for that area.
But that's always a possible, we could go back and is it, I mean, we haven't had a robust conversation on the particulars of that. Do we want to necessarily say as a council that that's going to be commercial as a default?
It's split. It's like, 30% commercial at Duff, and then we'll say 60% residential in the back is how it's.
Well, given the high traffic count, it would seem like the value of that land would be commercial, at least part way, not all the way back into there, but it gives opportunity for more. Actually, it could be that HOC potential zoning there, which we're short on.
I mean, we couldn't label it public land too, and then it's not anything. I think that's the kind of questions on the land use map. Do you want to show it as public because it is public, or do you want to show it as what you plan for it to be?
Well, those are good comments, John. I'm fine leaving it as it is. But Kelly, to your point that the land south of Mortensen would be examples of.
Yeah, those are definitely the examples that would come to mind for me. Any of that kind of university property. You will notice one other place that's university property. We did show that as RN3 already, which is off of Ontario. So if we showed it as university, it would default to RN3. In this case, we showed it as RN3. It probably doesn't matter either way. But
Where the ag land is now.
what was
It's a
that?
cornfield.
Where the ag land is now.
Former Healthy Life Center location.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Next item.
I'm on page 66 next. And two issues here on the bottom left, the bottom left goals. This is a near campus overlay. The bottom left goal says developing clear edges and transitional standards. I just don't know what we mean by clear edges here exactly. I mean, the zoning boundary or the overlay is going to have a clear edge either way. So is this talking about having like something visually apparent at the edge of this overlay? And I'm not sure that's what we really want.
But maybe it's not effective. I believe what it's trying to say is we don't want to blend it down and push out the single family uses. We don't want to we're okay with a bright line that you go from medium or high density for student housing purposes down to single family. We're not going to blend down and start eroding more single family just to have a transition. Mm-hmm. I think that was the intent of that statement.
I see. So I like that intent. So if there's a way to
Reword it.
Yeah, to reword it to express that more clearly, I think that would be helpful.
Which is kind of the opposite in most of the other areas. We're talking about transitioning up here, where I think we're saying we don't want to transition down because we know that's going to erode the likely single family house type that's in the area where the transition would occur.
So are we referring to transitional design standards for the larger buildings that are at the clear edge? I'm not sure where the transitional standards.
I think it's both. I think it's trying to say if it's not in the overlay or it's a true high density student project, it's going to go to the street and that's going to be the transition. I think it's also saying if you can add transitions into new intense housing projects where they're stepping down on their side of the street, that's appropriate also. That's what I think it's trying to do. The transitions need to occur on the intense side, not on the low intensity side. So that would probably need to be clarified to explain what I just said.
I like the way that you just said it. I mean,
Okay, next.
and then on the bottom right, this paragraph talks about removing the overlay district in certain areas. And I can't understand what's going on here. And whether it's the comprehensive plan overlay district, or we're talking about zoning here possibly, or.
It's already so well established as.
Yep. So I think what it's trying to say is that not all of the areas that are currently probably in an impact university overlay should be there, because some of those sites are probably appropriate to intensify for housing purposes, for student housing purposes. So like what it's picking up on Wood Street, that would be an area that's in an overlay now, commonly asked, can we intensify?
Yeah.
But it's all student dwelling houses. It's not apartments. I mean, the structures are not the same, but it is all
But
student.
you might
But
as well densify it.
So that
Right.
is what that is saying, is to review those situations. And I'm pretty sure that shows up on the land use map
Mhm.
as well. So you can see now the redirection area right here.
Yeah.
That's what it's, I think that's what it's trying to relate to.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'd suggest that this ambiguity can be removed just by clarifying this is talking about the zoning overlay,
Okay.
not the near campus overlay.
I mean, that's my first thought, that it's about the zoning overlays, not without going back over the map again. Because when I look at it, it has to mean the zoning, because if you look at the land use map, the overlay is not out by Lincoln Way. It's not on Wood Street. Those are different designations with no overlay. So it has to relate back to the zoning overlays.
And it doesn't make sense to have an action to change the document that we're currently drafting. I mean,
Right. It should not do that.
Kelly, just as an editing note, I see that the revised version still has a typo on the last bullet in the first column, the of campus related densities. I think it's the off campus related densities, maybe? Last bullet in that column. Keep going down. Keep going. There you go. to moderate the of campus.
Yep.
And I noticed it's still there in the other draft, so.
Okay.
My next comment is in the environment chapter.
Anything, other comments in this chapter?
And so, as I understand it, we're leaving all this compatibility stuff in the draft. See what kind of comments we get. I think I would say right now, leave it in. Let's process what it really means and see what we do in the final draft. So that's what my recommendation would be at this point.
I'll just add to that. I've sent in other comments to you that address like some, presentation detail issues, even in those areas. I'm not asking council to change like whether they exist there or not, right? So I'm just assuming that you'll look at them eventually and have to do something, right? Thanks.
I did want to say that we did send you this new map to replace the one that was in the plan, so that it's a lot easier to read. It has the same style now as all the other maps in the plan, and I think it'd be pretty easy for people to sort out where they are in this. So one question, let's just talk about this for a second. So the reserve areas are really meant to guide fringe plan policies themselves, right? That's what they are. They're not a land use designation exactly in and of themselves. They're meant to guide fringe plan policies. And when you go to the draft land use map, I gotta zoom out. The first draft, so this is, I think we need to correct this. You'll see here, says you are, but when RDG first made this map, the only urban reserve were the tier 3 and 4 areas. Now we have an urban fringe map that uses the same phrase of reserve area, but it's much broader. So I would be predisposed to taking the gray areas off of the land use map. I don't think we need to shadow in tiers 3 and 4 with no real explanation of why they're on the map. So I think we should cut these UR areas off and then have the fringe map be its own separate map, which is a much broader designation. Does anybody find value in showing the footprints of the scenarios kind of ghosted in here a little bit, but still not committed to anything? You still have the tier maps and the scenario discussion from before, which articulates it a lot clearer than this ever would.
You think it's confusing?
Well, I think you can't have two maps that use the same designation.
Yeah.
So either we would need to change one as scenario evaluation area, which isn't a land use designation, or just have the reserved label in one place.
I think that sounds reasonable.
So just put it on one map, right?
Mm-hmm.
And don't show the scenarios on the land use map itself.
It's kind of busy otherwise, I think.
Yeah, it just, they need to match. Otherwise, you're going to be asking, what do I do with two different things?
Can you go back to that previous map and show the 2 mile fringe?
We don't have to make this decision tonight, but from a style perspective, RDG has been using this topographic or relief map as the base. It helps to understand like what the influences of slope and streams and waterways are, but they also have some of this, like on this one, you're seeing green. That's not a land use designation. So we would have to be pretty clear if we're going to use these kinds of base maps when we adopt a regulatory map, what is regulatory and what's just graphical to inform context. So just to alert you to that, our current maps don't have this stuff. They're just 2D plain white maps, color on top, no context. So that's just something that I like this. I think it's better for the general public to understand sometimes, but we got to be clear what means something and what is just for information.
So on this, in the lower right-hand corner, some of that gray area actually goes outside of the 2 mile fringe, correct? The dotted line, is that our 2 mile fringe?
Yeah, as currently annexed to the city, that dotted line is the 2 mile bubble.
I'm just curious, can we show stuff outside of that?
Sure. I mean, we did a scenario that planned outside of that too. I mean, it's a very small portion. You don't have any subdivision control for it, but I don't think it's wrong for the city to show a land use intent.
Very good. Thank you.
Kelly, I love the fact that these maps are clearer, but just logistically, how are they going to appear with the plan? Are these linked in? Are they?
So what we're going to do for the public draft is these will be standalone PDFs. So I think we're going to break up. The plan got really big when we kind of put everything together. So we'll break it up into, you can download the whole thing or you can download each chapter. And then we're going to have this map and the land use map because they're the two most likely to matter to anybody as their own standalone PDFs. So you can go in and find your property and look at what you want to look at.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to move into the next element.
Let's, we've been sitting for 2 hours. I need to stretch. Let's just take a quick break because it's a good time. We're halfway through, right? Kelly, tell us we're halfway through.
I think so. If we're on page 66, yeah. Right? Isn't that where we were?
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll get
We're
back.
past halfway.
Okay, good.
We're like 2/3.
That's even better yet. All right. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, we are back in session.
So we're to the environmental element. Just keep plowing into it, I think.
I've got a page 86. That's E4 on the top right. And the title is, As the City Grows, Apply Climate Change Conscience Policies. I would just propose that we simplify this altogether and just say, apply climate change mitigation policies. It's not really a function of the city growing. I don't want to weaken this in the title. So that would be my suggestion.
So you would shorten it simply to what now?
Apply climate change mitigation policies.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not really sure what a conscience
I think
policy
it's
is.
supposed to be conscious policy.
Yes,
Probably.
It's supposed to be conscious, not
Yeah,
conscience.
but-
yes.
That's my suggestion.
Is that a motion?
If you'd like a motion on that, I'm happy to make it.
I would
Okay.
say that's different, but not. Mitigation means you're reducing impacts or ameliorating something probably. Not all things that we do will be mitigating anything, but might be a more
We could-
sustainable choice than the opposite or the alternative.
I'd be happy omitting the word mitigation to just call them climate change policies. Whatever we come up with under that category is fine too.
Yeah, I think that lets you deal with both. I think mitigation's a little bit too narrow.
Can we take,
Do you want a
and
motion?
you mean taking out the as the city grows bit?
Right.
I think that goes without saying because we're going to
Right.
adopt something. So I think
So the
eliminate it without
intent,
a motion.
I'll remind you, I think the reason that was worded that way was to remind people that we're not going to stop growing
Right.
and we're going to apply climate change policies in the future. So that's
The
why it
rest
was
of it's
worded
about
that
the
way.
growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's okay.
My fear is the title kind of seems to weaken it, that it's like,
That's fine because I think the text below represents we're going to grow,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So then it'll fit better with the style of the other ones.
Anyone object to that change? Otherwise, we just go ahead and, I don't see anyone objecting to it. So
So
just,
it's apply climate change policies.
Yep.
so the E4 title will be changed to apply climate change policies. Yep. Right.
Right.
And
Next.
you have something about the middle sentence, complete and maintain.
yeah, there's a typo there or something.
Yeah, you got that.
Yeah, because that changed when it was first drafted. We hadn't completed it yet. Now we have. So yeah, one of those, the complete needs to go.
So I have a question about the climate action plan and the way it appears in this section. And at this point, we say complete a climate action plan. Back on page 81, we acknowledge climate action initiatives, but there's no mention that we're actually contracting for a climate action plan. We simply talk about the things we've already done. And I think we have contracted for the plan, right? So it seems like it should be mentioned in the climate action initiatives paragraph.
So you basically add a paragraph here that talks about that we have the development of a climate action plan is underway.
Oh, I just put it in with climate action initiatives.
Oh, and that just put it there.
Yeah, because, that updates what we've accomplished so far, right?
Yeah.
Fine. So
Anything else under this
81.
chapter?
Page 89. Sorry, 88. Right, under item 6 there, the top of the middle column, the last paragraph says, or the last sentence of that paragraph says, for example, when homes or businesses relocate away from the floodplain, then the land should be returned to its natural state rather than redeveloped. It seems like a substantial policy change. I don't recall having discussed this one.
Yeah, that would probably lead to a significantly different non-conforming policy than what we currently have. If you're thinking about like in the South Duff area.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
So is council okay with striking that?
I think that would be my suggestion. I think we have a workable way to deal with development in the floodplain.
So that delete the for example sentence is what we're suggesting.
Hearing no objection, strike that sentence. Okay, anything else, David? On this page? Otherwise, you're going to parks.
Nothing more in environment.
Okay, anybody else? Any council, anything else? Comments on this? Okay, parks, trails, and greenways, Jarrett Kelly? Anything, what, council input?
I have one observation about the vision pages on each of these. Some of them are complete sentences, and some of them are just fragments. And I don't know whether that, what about open space and recreation facilities supporting these? Are we committed to that? Or maybe it's the longer ones that should be telescoped. But it seems weird that some are in complete sentence format and others are pseudo sentences like this one.
Do you have a suggestion on changing this one?
I don't know whether we want to go with the complete sentences or the telescoped version, which is what we've got here. Does this,
So I know what happened here. So I think at one point they all said Ames will do something. And probably between conversation and maybe they didn't all, but I think most of them, if not all of them, said will. And I ended up taking the will part out. And that's, I know for sure, like on this one, I changed this, not this one, the one that talks about stewardship.
well,
The environment.
so Steve, you mentioned just should, open space and recreation facilities should support the physical and social well-being of the community.
Should or shall?
Why can't it be like this?
I don't know that we're being
So if,
prescriptive. Maybe we are.
I mean, it's a vision statement. I don't know that it's prescriptive.
So then I think
Fine.
should.
Should, yeah.
And then the same would be true on the environment statement. Stewardship should support a sustainable community, et cetera.
Do we think should belongs in a vision
Yeah,
statement?
why can't it be like this again?
Yeah,
I don't
Open
care if
spaces
it's like
and the
this. I just,
recreational facilities are supporting the physical and social well-being of the community.
I just want us to be consistent with these visions. And some of our visions are much longer than others. And
I would, I personally, and probably because I helped write them, the ones that you don't like are to me, they're more like a statement. Like this one is a statement, right? Versus the other three that use the word will. I just, the will part
Yeah,
didn't really work for me, and we didn't go back and adjust those. And I agree that the style should be the same in the final document. If you want to be more like the will statements, we can go back and revise those, or we can switch the will ones to be more like these statements like this.
I like these better, personally.
I kind of think I do too. It's sort of, the vision is
Mhm.
open space and
Yes.
recreation facilities supporting the physical well-being. That's great.
Okay, so we'll go back and adjust. Mobility vision says Ames will have a well-connected, so we'll get rid of the will and change that to be like this. And then community character also says Ames will advance aesthetic and other stuff. So
advancing aesthetic.
we'll adjust the two wills that are left to
Great.
be more in line with these.
All right. Other comments? All right, moving on to parks. Or, I mean, any other comments under this category of parks?
So when you're talking about mandatory, so this is one that, and kind of asked about community act or public actions too. This is one where it talks about having a dedication of open space for parks. You need to update your subdivision ordinance or get a park and land dedication ordinance in place to really implement some of these things. It at least is holding for the growth areas that we need to plan for parks, but you will need some actions to make it effective the way it's described in here. Or you'll need to implement those actions to make it effective.
Ready for the next one? Mobility? Okay, mobility.
Well, that's not great. Apparently my page loads have failed. Oh, there we go. So this one is a little bit of a mix, right? We're trying to build off of we're not replacing Forward 45. Forward 45 kind of augments the really long range planning, really gets to the CIP type of projects you need to get a functional system. This is really setting that kind of baseline expectation about how we think about operational facilities, kind of the character of roads and streets, and then obviously connectivity, pedestrian and bicycle improvements as well. So there's a little bit of a mix here of policy and a little bit of mix of that's more design or standard based, trying to get to things that will have to be applied to projects, both city projects and development projects in the future. Like this is where the level of service standard is set, where when you get a traffic study, you're going to get an evaluation by your traffic engineer that says, does it meet the level of service D standard as described in the comp plan?
On this page, I would call out the climate action plan specifically on that bullet about future assessments of environmental issues.
Where was that one, Rachel?
It's under action 1. Sorry, I'm on the draft plan, so the numbers are a little different, but where it says 4th bullet, future assessments of environmental issues such as climate change may influence planning or prioritizing transportation improvements. I would just specifically call out the climate action plan may influence.
Okay.
Other comments on this one? All right, neighborhoods and sub areas.
On page 118, HD4 in the lower left states under housing choice and attainability, HD4, evaluate city programs and development standards for diversifying housing types, tenure, and price points within developments of a certain size. Can we get some clarity as to what the certain size is referring to?
You will need to define that in the future. It's basically, I think commonly, like you don't expect like a 4-unit development to solve an affordable housing problem. So there's some element of scale to make it economically feasible or to make it maybe even practical to do diversification. So this doesn't set it, but I think you would need to set that if you were to implement that action.
So it basically means of a minimum size to be determined?
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay.
Kelly,
Kelly,
can you go back to page 115? I would just it's a philosophical.
Which page one?
Page 115. It's got the projected housing demand by tenure and price point. Keep going up.
Oh, this is. Oh, sorry.
Yes. So I understand that there's some kind of extrapolation done on this. But help me understand. It shows projected housing demand by tenure and price point. Under $150,000 homes, next 10 years, 220, and then 256. So 7% of the need. It's under 150, and 150 to 225, 14%. And my question is, how are we going to get there?
Can't. So it's just not really possible without an immense level of public subsidy. So what the chart's trying to say is you really can't expect the market to produce that. So the idea is that you're going to have to filter through existing housing stock to provide those homes. And the other thing is this information gets dated really fast. So this was from 2018 and 19 when we talked about these income levels and these categories of price points. They might not even really be applicable anymore in another year when you talk about what our real estate market's done in the last couple of years.
Well, and same for the rent under $600. I don't know what the rental rates are. But they show 550 units under 600. The 600 to 1,000 is probably a little more believable. But I guess the point is that worth commenting on, recognizing that these categories are somehow identifying are probably underachievable, and just shows the importance of supporting or protecting existing housing stock? Because the point is that one way to interpret it is that, well, we're expecting people to build houses on 150 grand when lots are, we know that's not feasible.
I mean, I think it's trying to put data in front of people that not in your current land use policy plan. It's in a different way. It kind of talks about it, but you're trying to show. I think we want something like this. I guess the question you have is, if it's unachievable, why is it shown in the plan? I think it shows the need. It doesn't say, it's not saying the market can necessarily produce it. Maybe there's a way that we can, with subsidy assistance, some of it. We're going to have enough assistance to do 500 ownership units under $150,000 in the next 20 years. That would be a big lift for us, since we haven't come even close to that in 20 years. I guess I would take direction from the council on how to depict this.
Well, because in the other chart, it says the type under 150 generally accommodated by existing housing. So the implication is anything under 150 is existing, but that we're going to try and get 150 and up in new housing. That's why the chart says price points distributed by development types.
That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to tell you, it's trying to make an estimate of what kind of housing needs to be produced by building type to maybe meet those price points. And again, I don't know that we can produce a $150,000 house no matter how you build it.
Outdated numbers anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
It's going to confuse people.
Well,
I'm
so
just trying to understand
this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be stagnant for 20 years in your plan. This is something, when you do a 5-year review, you should go in and update your information to reflect your trends. So I wouldn't look at this as something in 2030 you would even want to look at. This probably has a 5-year shelf life at best.
Well, I think the text makes an argument that the trends are away from single-family housing and toward multifamily, and I don't have a problem with putting these numbers in, because it's a good reminder of the members of the community that need more affordable housing.
I think you had, do you have a question, Gloria?
I did. Question is, where was it? Oh, HD 11 on page 118. This isn't so much a question, but it's to note that in this section, at the bottom of the middle column there, we actually refer to the hospital medical zone.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the other references should be hospital medical, just as it is in the zoning code.
And if you go up one page, Kelly, a couple more questions on HD1. It says in the first sentence, support for increased supply, create broader range of price points, making equity housing more attainable. What is meant by equity housing?
What we would probably call ownership.
Pardon me?
Ownership housing. I don't think we use that term anywhere else. I think Marty just sprinkled that in there, but it would mean ownership housing.
Oh, so equity.
Having equity.
Having equity. I got you. Okay, I'm sorry. And that says, although the city endeavors to increase the percentage of ownership housing units in the city as a percentage of total units. I'm trying to understand what that meant.
So we have disproportionately, because we're a university town, we have way more rental housing in the city than ownership housing. And it's about a 60-40 split. And as the city, I think we want to be more conscious of our land resources, that we want to add ownership housing options to the city. But ultimately, we also still need to not forget about rental. We need both. but we do want to have some emphasis towards single family over rental because of the disproportionate stock that already exists.
Okay, so given the fact that, under the data, we talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago, that the student enrollment numbers are evidence of student rentals, is there any merit to clarifying that the rental needs are really the rental for professionals, non-college students?
I thought we had an action that discouraged niche product type like student housing. Trying to remember where that is.
Well, I'm content if you could just make sure that's.
So I was pretty confident we tried to get to that because that is kind of our point. At this point in time, you don't really have a justification to pursue student housing projects. If someone showed up and wanted to change a land use designation and say student housing, I think we would all question that.
Right. Okay.
If we want to do multifamily for many purposes, I think that should be on the table for discussion. Let me
What
look
you're
here.
referring to, Kelly, is on page 112. So there is something there.
On page 112.
Yeah, top right.
Got it.
So for my pages didn't load there, so it's blank. My page loads for some reason didn't work on all the pages here. That's my 112.
It's there, I'm telling you.
Okay, I believe you.
Okay. All right. Gloria, did you find you get the taken care of hospital medical? All right. Did you have something else?
Yep, I'm done.
On this action page,
Go ahead, Rachel.
HT3, it talks about auxiliary dwelling units. The plan interchangeably uses auxiliary and accessory, so I would maybe stick with one way to define those.
Which policy did you see that reaction?
HD3.
Good point.
HD3.
Mhm.
Okay,
Third line.
see it.
Yeah.
And we're okay with accessory rather than auxiliary, right? I'd say that's way more common.
There's a couple other spots with auxiliary to change to, but
I'd add just about the nomenclature HD1. First, I don't understand why it's HD rather than just H. What does the D stand for? Is it development, maybe? But I can live with either way. The bigger issue is that we have on this page 117 guiding principles that start HD1. Then on the next page, we have actions that also start HD1.
Yeah.
So we just need to give them unique names.
So in the new version, they use the hyphenated nomenclature now.
Okay.
So they tried to deal with that because it was inconsistent in different elements how it was done. So I think they've gone through and made every action have a 1 hyphen something else
I see. All right.
so that it has a better pairing to the principles above.
Good.
Anything else on this chapter? All right. Community character. Any comments? That's it.
I was going to say, this is one thing I brought up last time. This is another place where we've got that misspelled logo. And I don't know if it got changed on this page or not in the draft.
Yeah, we noted that there's 2 locations for that graphic. I'll see if it got caught yet.
Okay.
I think it's caught in both places now.
All right. Next steps, Kelly.
So I know it was a long 2.5 hours, fairly productive. We'll work with RDG. I think the clear goal is it needs to be a perfected draft to get back to you. We have some work to do, so we will endeavor to do that by the 17th. And if there's something that comes up where that's not achievable, we'll be in touch with you to tell you what we can do about it.
Were we going to look at the land acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I got to bring that up separately here. So on what I emailed out this afternoon on page 5. Yeah. So we weren't 100% sure what to do with it and how to fit it into the plan. So this first paragraph is based upon the ISU land acknowledgement. So there's not much authorship here by staff or RDG. So that's really the main thing that you referenced to us. We can leave it with the first paragraph. I started to write a little bit of where did we go from there, from the treaty, to just kind of lead into it. And we kind of ended when the 1890s, but because we don't really have a history chapter. So I think I have two questions. Do you want the second paragraph? And well, first off, is this how you wanted this to get covered, or was there some other idea to do this? And then secondly, if this is close, did you want the second paragraph, or did you just want the acknowledgement?
I'm not sure about the dates in the second paragraph. Some of those seem off by a year.
They came from the current land use policy plan.
They still seem off by a
Okay.
year.
I can't vouch for them other than I copied them from our adopted plan.
Because I think Iowa State celebrated its sesquicentennial of 1858, which is the number that is on all of their advertising for the founding of the college.
Interesting.
And I believe Ames, we had our sesquicentennial to coincide with 1864, although the platting may not have occurred in 1864. So there are some non-traditional numbers in this paragraph, which may be
Yeah.
accurate, but which are not
Okay.
standard. So
I will double check if I copied those correctly, if we keep it.
Your question is, do you
Seems okay.
need paragraph 2?
Yeah. The first question, is this what we wanted? And second, do you need the paragraph?
I guess I sort of feel like the second paragraph takes away from the land acknowledgement, because the land acknowledgement is about
Yep.
the native population, and the other is about all those white people who came in and took the land and did things with it. And so I don't think they belong together. I don't necessarily,
That's
wanna
fine.
see it
So like I
gone.
said, I didn't know where to go with it. When I first started to put this together, I was like, what kind of chapter are we writing? Does it just a statement or not? I agree that it's leading towards something else with the second paragraph.
Yeah.
And if that's not what we're interested in, I have no issue getting rid of the second paragraph.
Yeah. I'd say I like paragraph 1. Spot on.
I like paragraph 1 too, but I think we should also credit Iowa State as the originator of that language. If that is, it looks to me like it's right out of their land acknowledgement.
It's pretty darn close. Yeah.
So seems like it should get a footnote or something crediting ISU.
And on a separate note, is that still Tracy's last name?
Nope. It is not.
You probably already had that
It's
circled.
circled.
She has to change her name
Okay,
back.
just checking.
Yep. I'm sorry.
Understand
It's
the
okay.
force of this document.
Sorry. It's a policy document. She has to change her name back.
Okay, so we're deleting. So that was the only new thing that's that's really content based. So we'll clean that up. All right. Anything else for tonight?
Nope.
All right.
All right. Very good. Thank you. So I need a motion directing staff to proceed with the policy issue changes we talked about tonight.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Kelly, do you want any more edit stuff sent to you or not?
So the typo stuff, we've gone through it ourselves. We've sent 2 batches over to RDG. It's been partially incorporated. I think at this point, we probably can't double or triple check what we've already sent over. We just need to get the next one back from them. So I think I have to work from what I had last Friday. Some of the stuff that David had, we had already, I mean, we've caught a lot of it too. I mean, when you were looking at this, we hadn't said any edits back to them yet either. So. All right. So hopefully we have it for you on the 17th, and it's a consent item on the 24th, right?
All right. Thank
Steve
you.
says no.
Moving on to disposition of communications to council. We dealt with,
2 and 4. So we still have 1, 3, and 5.
no, I think we got, according to what was sent out today, I think one was, I was just looking at, land use policy amendment was for 1621. Wilson, that was the one that we talked about.
No, we didn't.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Nope, you're right. Right. All right. Item 1. Sorry.
That's right. It's all. I understand.
Getting a little wrung out here.
This is the old.
Good.
Yeah, this is the location which was the old maintenance shop for the school district.
Mhm.
Someone's planning to use it differently. Initial land use policy amendment. We give you a staff report. It clearly would say if you want to move forward, no matter which way you want to move, we'd like to have the neighbors get some input. So we've asked the potential buyer to get input, and then we'll come back to your report, and then you'll get a better feeling how you want to proceed. Right, Kelly?
Yeah, I think this is one where there's no, I mean, Plan 2040 doesn't have a policy for this either. So there's really nothing on record about this property.
So
Is there
Do you want a motion for
motion?
Yeah. So
option A, to direct staff to conduct an initial developer outreach meeting?
sort of, we want the
I want the
developer.
developer to do it.
We want the
not us.
developer
Oh,
to
okay.
explain the project because I don't know what the project is. So this is different. We've never done this. I think what we want is for the developer to host a neighborhood meeting about the property.
Right.
And after that is done, we will send somebody to the meeting, but we're not going to run the meeting. And then we can bring it back
That's
on an
okay.
agenda
Okay.
and report to council. If you
I
want.
think
I would-
option A is probably fine in the motion. That's
Okay.
actually contained in the report.
Right.
And is there outreach beyond the meeting? Do they send notes? A letter saying if you have comments, where to send the comments? What if someone can't make the meeting?
That's up to the developer. This is a developer initiated.
Yeah, I think it really has to be on the developer. We'll help them put together the notice list and invite people to attend the meeting, or we can suggest that they receive comments. But I know we haven't done this before, but I think this is really the appropriate way to do is put this on the developer to take initiative.
We'll have to report back and say only
Yeah.
2 people showed up, or you're not getting any input.
I just want to create a mechanism if somebody can't attend a meeting, then some mechanism to collect feedback.
Yeah, we can put that in the instructions to the.
That'd be great.
developer.
Get a motion by Brown. Second, it was, you got the second. Who seconded the motion?
David?
Second.
Did you? Oh, thanks.
I think I did.
He did.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? Carried. All right, now we go to item number 3. The auditorium, reduced parking for auditoriums and theaters.
Yeah,
I would move that we put this on a future agenda for discussion. Do we have to do that at this
If you
level,
just-
or can we just pick an option?
If you know it's very clear, you can just say initiate a text amendment for downtown. If you want to discuss the options, then you put it on an agenda.
Oh, okay. In that case, I would move that we initiate a text amendment eliminating all parking requirements for theaters within downtown and campus town zoning.
All right. Any discussion?
So I'm not sure I'm comfortable with eliminating the campus town part, because I think the parking situation is much more constrained in campus town than it is downtown. So I would rather us just focus on the downtown and not the CSC.
I
So I
like
won't
it
be
when
supporting the motion.
parking's more constrained, so that's fine.
So this,
All right. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No,
Abstain, conflict.
Okay, motion carried.
so this just starts the zoning ordinance process. It goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission, will return to you, and ultimately you'll have to decide.
Okay.
I would prefer to have some limits, but whatever. That's what we're doing.
Planning and zoning, maybe we'll recommend those.
And then the last one is item number 5 on define temporary. Can you get a little bit?
yeah.
Kelly?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
It's defined temporary. It's a request from the ZBA.
Yeah, we tried to explain it's the result of the yard waste facility special use permit process. The board obviously thinks we should have some different standards or definitions or something. If council wants to define temporary or address that particular issue, it would need to come back for a staff report and be on an agenda for discussion, I think. I'm not sure there's one clear answer. We gave a couple of options. And to me, it's not a rush. It's not something I think we need to get into until later this fall, if you even want to deal with it.
Thinking on the agenda, you would prefer to come back when?
I don't think we'd come back till October.
It's fine. October, November.
And it would be a staff report to talk about what this means a little bit more.
I would move we put it on a future agenda.
I think the one thing that needs to be eventually get clear is it just about yard waste facilities or about other conceptually temporary things. That's what's not 100% clear in the ZBA request, but that's what you'll have to sort out.
David?
Yeah, I would, when I tried to understand this, it seems to me that the issue is not so much the word temporary, it's whether the ZBA has the authority to issue waivers of zoning requirements
And they
as part
don't.
of their thing, right?
And they don't.
Then they don't, right? So that's the problem. And,
Right.
And right. So
So anything that's permanent, so the thought process is if it's permanent, they do not have discretion to say that you don't have to meet a zoning ordinance standard. They don't have that discretion. If it's temporary and you're making it work for a short period of time, the asphalt batch plant lets the board make some decisions like that because it's not permanent. And that's the difference. They do not have discretion to waive standards. That is not in the ordinance, nor should it be.
So I'm really hesitant to create an entire category called temporary that allows like a whole unknown set of things to happen. So I would prefer that we limit to, we know we have an issue with the waste disposal site because it just keeps coming up. We have an issue there. We need to provide this facility in Ames somehow, and there's a complication there. So I favor doing that somehow, trying to address that particular issue in the most targeted way possible. I don't know what that is.
Isn't that what would be discussed? I mean, I don't know. Did somebody second my motion? Can we even discuss this?
I thought, well, we're out of order. Sorry.
Yeah, so.
Is there a second to the motion?
Terrible.
All right. Yes, it's been seconded. Amber did. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy to discuss the whole issue.
So it'll just come back as a staff report based on this memo then sometime late fall. And then you can give us direction on the scope after that.
Cool.
All right. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
I
Any opposed? All right. Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. All right.
So all 5 of those got referred.
Yes.
Sorry,
Two.
we're the worst.
Perfect.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, 2 and 4 also referred to a future agenda. Okay, Trevor, council comment.
I do not have any comments tonight. Thank you.
Rowan,
Nothing for me, thanks.
David.
I thank you, council, for your patience tonight. I only have, I think, 23 more things to discuss. So number one, nothing tonight.
Honey.
Nothing for me.
Nothing.
Rummage Rampage is going on at the intermodal facility at 129 Hayward until Friday. You can drop off items tomorrow or Thursday, and on Friday from 8 to noon, all items that are left are half price. And all of that profit goes to local nonprofits that are providing volunteers for the event. So it's a great event, and you can come down and buy things at noon tomorrow and Thursday, and maybe I'll see you there. I'm doing a lot of time there. Great event. That's it.
Very good. All right. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.